On a Wednesday morning in May 2006, the assembly line at the Maytag plant in Herrin, Illinois, stopped in the middle of a shift. The workers were told to walk to the warehouse. About 1,000 of them filed in from the production floor and stood there while a company representative told them the plant would close by the end of the year. A worker named Katrina Sims described it afterward. "We were working the assembly line," she said, "and they shut it down. Then they sent us all to the warehouse." The mayor, Vic Ritter, stood outside the building later that day and said the people in that warehouse deserved better than what they got. He was right. He was also, at that moment, not fully aware of the specific shape of what had been done to them. Here's the shape of it. In the 18 months before that Wednesday morning, Maytag had committed $32 million to Herrin. That money went toward a new product line, a capital investment in the future of that building, the kind of spending that signals a company intends to be somewhere for a while. Workers watched the investment arrive. They watched the production floor change. There were announcements of expansion plans that went beyond $30 million on top of that. Whatever the plant had been, it was becoming something different, something with a longer horizon built into it. Then, Whirlpool Corporation, headquartered in Benton Harbor, Michigan, completed its acquisition of Maytag on March 31st, 2006. 40 days later, a Whirlpool vice president said publicly that the business in the plants they'd just purchased was broken in a way that made investment in the facilities untenable. 40 days, and $32 million in the building they were calling broken. Those two numbers sit at the center of everything that follows. Maytag, by 2005, was a company that had been under strain for years without that strain being particularly visible to most of the people who worked for it. The brand had been built around a specific idea. Its machines didn't fail. The advertising campaign that made this argument had run for close to 4 decades. The Maytag repairman was presented as the loneliest man in his trade because there was nothing for him to fix. He sat by a phone that never rang. He did crossword puzzles and played solitaire. The campaign ran through 3 actors and more than 140 commercials for the first 2 alone, and it had been recognized as the longest-running character in television advertising history. Most people who saw it had no idea the basset hound the repairman acquired in 1986 was named Newton, after the Iowa town where the first Maytag washing machine had been built. That detail wasn't in the commercials. It was just the name they gave the dog. The machines weren't selling that story anymore. Not at the price point Maytag needed to charge for them, and not against manufacturers operating at substantially lower cost. The brand was intact. The business underneath it wasn't. Maytag had built a portfolio that included Amana and Gen Air, brands that carried their own recognition, but the cost structure holding all of it together had drifted beyond what the market would support. A private equity firm called Ripplewood Holdings made the first serious acquisition offer. They saw a nationally recognized brand sitting on a cost structure that had drifted out of alignment with the market it was competing in. Then Haier, a Chinese appliance manufacturer that had grown from a near-bankrupt refrigerator factory in Qingdao in 1984 into the world's largest home appliance company by volume, entered with its own bid. The Haier offer registered differently in the United States than the Ripplewood offer had. The trade policy debates that legislators had been conducting in the abstract for years were suddenly arriving at the address of a specific American company, and people who hadn't been paying close attention started paying close attention. Whirlpool entered with an offer of $1.37 billion, and Haier withdrew. The final acquisition price was approximately $1.9 billion. Before the deal could close, it required approval from the Department of Justice Antitrust Division. The International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, which represented approximately 800 production workers at the Herrin plant, filed objections before the approval came through. Their argument was specific. The combined Whirlpool-Maytag operation would produce something in the range of 80% of the washers and dryers manufactured in the United States, a level of market concentration that the union argued crossed the line from competitive to anti-competitive. 3 out of every 4 machines. The Justice Department reviewed the antitrust argument and approved the deal anyway, in March of 2006. The IAM's president said afterward that the approval was the direct result of an abdication of oversight responsibility, and that it would cost jobs. He was, on that point, correct. The acquisition closed March 31st. On May 10th, 40 days later, Whirlpool announced it was closing the Maytag corporate headquarters in Newton, Iowa, the Maytag Research and Development Center, the plant in Herrin, and the plant in Searcy, Arkansas. Together, the closures were projected to eliminate 4,500 jobs and save approximately $400 million in annual operating costs. The machines that had been made in Herrin would be redesigned to fit Whirlpool's production platform and built instead at facilities in Ohio, where labor costs were lower. The question the timeline raises isn't complicated. If the plants were broken in a way that made investment untenable, what was the $32 million for? There's no record of that question being answered directly. What's on the record is the sequence. The investment came in, the acquisition closed, 40 days passed, and then the verdict arrived. The company that declared the Herrin plant untenable had owned it for less than 6 weeks. For about 4 decades, the Maytag plant had been the largest employer in Herrin. The annual payroll ran somewhere in the range of $30 to $35 million, moving through a city of roughly 12,000 people. The announcement came in May. The closure was set for December. Federal law, specifically the WARN Act, the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act, requires employers to give 60 days advance notice before a mass layoff of this scale. The 7-month window between announcement and actual closure exceeded that minimum. Whether it was enough time for 1,000 people to reorient their working lives is a different question than whether the legal requirement was met. That stretch, announcement to actual closure, has a particular texture in towns where this kind of thing happens. Businesses that had organized themselves around the plant's payroll cycle started adjusting before the plant itself shut down. Some closed before December because the workers who had filled the lunch counters during the workday were already gone. Their positions moved or eliminated in the months between the announcement and the end of the year. A waitress at one of the local cafes described it plainly. You can't take the good-paying jobs out and replace them with jobs at half the pay. She had worked at Maytag herself for 30 years before moving to the cafe. She knew the arithmetic. Workers who had spent 20 or 30 years on that production floor had about 6 months to figure out what the next part of their lives would look like. The union contracts that Whirlpool had cited as part of the cost problem were, in practical terms, the mechanism by which many of those workers had built stable lives. The contracts and the stability were the same thing, viewed from different directions. One woman, Angela Wagner, had worked at Maytag in Herrin for close to 20 years. After the closure, she went back to school with assistants that included federal trade adjustment assistants, and eventually became a massage therapist and an office manager. She later appeared in press coverage about what Herrin had managed to do after the plant left, and she talked about the people who had helped, with gas money, with food, with transportation during the period when none of it was settled. She meant this as a good thing. The fact that those kinds of help were necessary is part of the same account. The Southern, the regional newspaper, reported that some of the workers Jacqueline Wells had known from the plant had died by suicide in the period following the closure. Wells herself had worked at Maytag for more than 5 years. She said many families she knew left Southern Illinois to find work somewhere else. The ones who stayed and the ones who couldn't. Those are 2 different populations in the numbers, and the numbers don't separate them cleanly. The building eventually transferred to Phoenix Investors, a Milwaukee-based investment company. The purchase price was $1 million. That number is worth staying with for a moment. $1 million for a facility that had carried 30 to 35 million in annual payroll, and into which 32 million had gone in the 18 months before the end. The current tenants of that building are Eisen Manufacturing, which makes automotive components, a company called Orthotech, and Southern Illinois Healthcare. Swanson Industries, which makes hydraulic equipment, has also taken over part of the space in the years since. The Maytag presence in Herrin had arrived sometime in the middle of the last century, part of the same expansion of production capacity that placed Maytag facilities across the Midwest. Southern Illinois was coal country, historically, part of the broader Deindustrialization belt that would reshape the American interior over the second half of the 20th century. A region that by the 2000s had accumulated decades of experience watching industrial employers leave. It wasn't the kind of place that drew large industrial employers without specific reason, and the reason, when it came, was straightforward: available labor, available land, and a company that needed to grow its production footprint. For 4 decades, that arrangement held. Families built their economic lives around the plant, in the way that families do when one employer defines the baseline. Children followed parents onto the production floor, and the city's tax base, its school budget, the small businesses on the main street, all of it tracked, in one way or another, to whether the plant was running well. When the plant left, Mayor Ritter said he thought Herrin was done. He said this later, looking back. He changed his mind, though he didn't immediately know why. The city formed a working group. Local officials, area colleges including Southern Illinois University's Regional Campus Network, a workforce development organization called Mantracon, and started building the infrastructure for what comes after. It's slow work. It doesn't have the drama of a plant opening or the finality of a closure. It's the accumulation of smaller decisions made by people who stayed. What didn't happen in Herrin is what happened to Newton, Iowa, in a more visible way. Newton attracted wind energy manufacturers and eventually found a different industrial identity. Herrin's story is quieter than that, with replacements that came in smaller increments and at smaller scale. In 2010, Herrin appeared on the front page of USA Today, not in connection with the closure, in connection with what the city had done afterward. The committee, the training programs, the workers who had found ways through. Mayor Ritter kept copies of that paper on his desk and said he was proud of Herrin for making it to the big times. The city that Maytag had left was being written about, for once, for something other than what was taken from it. Whether that constitutes a resolution is a question the data doesn't answer cleanly. The population held. The median income didn't recover to where it had been. Both of those things are true. The Maytag brand still exists. Whirlpool owns it, and the machines sold under that name are built at facilities in Clyde and Marion, Ohio, the same Ohio plants the union contracts in Illinois were partly displaced in favor of. Phoenix Investors manages the former Herrin facility. Parts of it are occupied, and parts are waiting. The $32 million went into a building the new owner declared broken 40 days after the papers were signed. Whether those two facts are connected is not something any document in the public record directly addresses. What the record shows is the sequence: the investment, the acquisition, the 40 days, the announcement, and then the 20 years Herrin spent working on a question no one in Benton Harbor was asked to stick around for.